So thank you for joining us today. I'm Sophie Thompson, co-founder and CEO of VirtualSpeech, which is an online platform that blends e-learning with AI practice exercises available online and in virtual reality. As always, if you're joining us live and have any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A box or in the chat, and I'll make sure that we ask our guest. And today's guest is Lindsey Coode, Head of Innovation at Learning Pool. Lindsey has over 25 years experience designing and managing learning technology projects and currently leads Learning Pool Labs. This is an evidence-based research and ideas hub that creates innovations to maximise the potential of people and their organisations. Previous projects include immersive soft skills training, voice command audio scenarios, and a natural interaction language engine. One of this year's research projects is around scenario-based learning with the use of generative AI to help learners practice their skills and receive feedback. And we're delighted to have Lindsey join us today to share her findings. So thank you, Lindsey.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So could you start off by providing an overview of your background at Learning Pool and how you came to be using generative AI?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, I've worked in learning technologies for a very, very long time. Makes me feel quite old actually sometimes, but there we go. I'm probably been working in learning technologies as long as some of our amazing team have been alive, but there we go. Um, so so I've been at Learning Pool for about 14 years. So the longest time I've worked anywhere. And I came in as a learning designer. Well, it was my first kind of proper management role. I came in overseeing a team of learning designers and really building up our kind of in-house content team, basically. So I did that for quite a few years. I really heavily focused on the kind of the how people learn, basically. And in that role, I was really looking at kind of individually learning modules. So a customer would come to us, they'd say, we want an e-learning module on this. We'd work with them, we'd create them something amazing, but it was just a small piece of the puzzle. And I became quite interested in kind of how we could take people on that journey. What was the end-to-end process? So how do we take people from where they are now to where we need them to be, basically? So I started kind of digging a bit more. We have learning platforms as well. So I started kind of nosing into areas that weren't really my domain and asking questions about kind of why couldn't we do this and why couldn't we kind of look at providing programs that did the whole journey and things like that. And then I started to kind of get quite interested in how the platforms worked. Were they really more focused on the administrator or were they more focused on the learner? So that was kind of where my interest came from. And eventually, after me annoying them for so long, they said, well, do you want to come over and work in the product team so that you can help us develop the platforms and really kind of start to impact in a bit more detail? And I think that kind of those two sides of my experience really help in the role that I'm doing now as head of innovation. So obviously being head of innovation is quite a broad job description, really. It can mean anything from looking at kind of a company's processes to kind of their product innovation. I'm probably more firmly in the product innovation, although I am also responsible for generative AI across the business as well. And our remit in Learning Pool Labs is basically, we're really lucky in that we've got a real scope, which you don't often get within larger organizations, to do that kind of blue sky thinking. So we effectively look, it varies depending on the day, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years in the future, far enough in the future that we don't worry too much about making it reality. So we're trying to push the boundaries and really think about where we might be as a company quite a distance away. So yeah, that's it really. And that's kind of why I got involved with the generative AI when it came along, because the problems have always been there. But we've not always had we've always had solutions. We've always had solutions that work. But I think what generative AI gives us is the ability to scale, to do things at scale that previously we could only do one-to-one between humans and things like that. So I think that's what's really driven everything forward this year and starting to see some huge changes and some great stuff. I know you guys are working a lot with generative AI as well. So there's so much that we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. So the development of the generative AI project in Learning Pool Labs, sounds like it was driven by more of a business need for customers rather than just being experimental. Like you said, that it helps to scale things that otherwise we could only do in person. Were there any other business needs that you thought at the start that the project could address?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was kind of experimental in a way. We actually worked with another organization called Mind Tools, who I'm sure you've probably heard of. I'm sure many people on this call have. So they specialize in kind of leadership and management learning content. When generative AI first came out, it was difficult to persuade anyone that it was trustworthy enough to actually use in an organizational setting. So we decided that we would partner with Mind Tools to try and kind of tame the beast in a way. So to harness the power of generative AI, but getting it to focus on their content so that we could trust the responses it was giving a bit more. So in some ways, it was just that we were excited about the technology and we wanted to have a play. So what we did was we all got in a room together and just kind of went, right, what are the challenges we've got? What are the solutions that we might be able to put into place and things like that. And we came up with two basically. So we had two ideas initially that we wanted to test. One was called Coach. So that was basically kind of like a chatbot friends type of thing. We actually use this internally a lot now. We use something called Confluence, but it's a bit like SharePoint and things like that. And it scrapes all of our kind of product manuals. It scrapes our staff handbook and our policies. And so it means that people internally can go in and say, what do I do about maternity leave? I've got a member of my team going off. I need to know some information. Or they might say, can our product do this? Rather than having to go to lots of different places and not being sure where to find it, then they can just go to one place is the idea. So that was one idea we had. And then the other one was initially called Project Converse, now AI Conversations. And that one is to do with role playing. So it's an age-old problem that we've had. Difficult conversations are difficult. It's one of my favorite lines at the moment. There's a reason they're called difficult conversations, and lots of managers really struggle with them. And what we were finding is that there's lots of ways that you can help people with that. You can give them e-learning, you can give them tips and frameworks and pointers. But what you can't do easily, and I mean, some people do it, is role play. And that's really what you need. You need, for learning to stick, you need that practice element. You can't just be sat there absorbing it. So that was what we wanted to do. And that was where AI Conversations came from, was looking for a solution to that problem and realizing that actually generative AI can do that really well. And it can also do other things like assessing you and things like that. But I think we'll come on to that in a bit more detail later. The reason that we progressed with AI Conversations above Coach is that when we showed them to customers and talked to them about the value, that was the one that blew them away. That was the one that we had kind of analysts saying, I've not seen something like this before. Customers saying, can I have it now? How much is it? Normally when you show people something new, they're like, yeah, maybe. And kind of it takes them a while to come around to it. But this was different. And it's been really nice because we've been able to move at quite a pace because we know the appetite is there, basically.
Yeah, it definitely has that wow factor for that active learning. And could you possibly show us what either Coach or Project Converse look like, whether you've got a demo or a video?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just wondering the best way to do it. I do have a demo, but I've got a feeling because I'm on Zoom, it may not let me do the voice bit. So let me try it. And then if it won't, I can do a bit of the video as well, or maybe we can share that later. Sorry, I'm not used to, where do I share? Oh, there, share screen. Nope, that wasn't what I meant to do. Share screen. Oh, it says I'm not allowed to. Host disabled,
Oh no,
participant screen
that's
sharing.
me. Share screen options. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
Okay, you should have it now.
Great. Let me see. Can you see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I'll just talk you through roughly what it is. We've kept the interface really simple because what we wanted people to do was to really focus on that conversation. So we see this as often being part of a larger program. So you might give them some learning first, and then they would go into this to be able to practice the skills that they're trying to learn. So it starts off by setting the scene. So you can see here that I'm a manager. So this is comes off score. Well, this is a SCORM package basically. So if it's loading off someone's learning platform, it knows who they are and things like that. So we've used their name so that it's quick and easy for them to understand the role that they're playing. And we've then got a series of AI characters. So Evan is one of our more challenging characters, shall we say, although I'm getting quite fond of him the more I talk to him, even though he doesn't want to do what I want him to. So basically, he is resistant to coming back into the office. He wants to continue working from home, doesn't see it as a priority. And my role really is to try and persuade him. So I'll have a conversation with him shortly. But you can see down here on the left, there's these 5 bullet points. These bullet points are the final assessment framework. So you're kind of getting 2 forms of assessment through this, or feedback, sorry. You're getting the feedback in the form of Evan's responses, but you're also getting the feedback at the end in terms of how you performed. Okay, so I think that really does kind of add quite a bit so that they can see what's going on and start to really kind of notice themselves what they're doing and what's working and what's not. So I'll start the chat in a sec. You can see we've got these clocks down here. The one is for each response and the larger one is for the overall conversation time. So you'll see those start to count down. So I have to stop wittering when I hit start chat. So I will do that now. So I'll start by typing. There's different ways that you can interact. But as I said, I'm not sure if my microphone and things are going to work when I'm on while I'm on Zoom. So in theory, Evan will respond to whatever I ask him. So he wants to know what I want to do today. Luckily, it's fairly forgiving on typing, so I won't waste time correcting my typos. Hopefully it'll get the general gist, which is quite nice as well. So Evan is not keen to come back in at all. So as I said, I now need to try and persuade him. So let me switch to talk and see whether this will work while I'm on Zoom. Yeah, I do get that, Evan. I know that there's definitely benefits to working from home. Let's have a quick look at the benefits of being in the office. Have you got any that you can suggest? And so what this then does is it's basically using speech to text. So it will go off. Oh, it is working. That's good. So it will go off, transcribe what I've said, and it then gives that to the AI. I quite like it because I think differently when I'm speaking to when I'm typing.
Mm-hmm. And with the stop clocks, you get 2 minutes to reply each time to Evan.
So yeah, I do get that, Evan. I know that you're not keen to come back in. I mean, the obvious benefit is collaborating with your colleagues. You've got huge amounts of experience, really valuable experience. And I think it would be great if you could come in and work with the team a bit more closely. I don't know what it's going to do with that. I don't know whether it will pick you up or me. We'll see. Oh, no, it did. That's fine. It makes it slightly challenging with demoing. I won't go too far into it, but you get the idea. If we go the full kind of 6 minutes or so, but you can see he very much is responding to what I say, basically. So it really does have that kind of that feeling of being in a real kind of conversation with someone. So what happens when these shot clocks wind down? Or I can click done at any time if I feel like I've finished the conversation. And then I can either choose to end the session or I can ask for the feedback. So what it's doing in the background is basically taking the responses that I've given and it's comparing those against the framework. So unsurprisingly, as I had quite a short conversation, I didn't do that well, although it did seem to find something that I did in each objective that was vaguely useful. if you're having a good conversation, you would be expecting to get kind of 8s and 9s for a decent manager. I would expect a kind of newish manager to be getting sort of 5s and 6s as long as they're trying, and things like that. But what I quite like about it is for each one, it tells you why you've got the score that you've scored. And it gives you examples, so it will say things like you said this or you alluded to that, but it also gives you ways that you can improve. So what that means is you can then jump straight back in and go and try the conversation again. You can see we've got the retry button down here. So yeah, quite useful for that
Brilliant.
learning experience. So hopefully
Yeah.
that makes sense. One thing I didn't show was we've also got text to speech, so you can hear Evan, but we'll save that for another day.
Oh, great. And Salvia raises a really good point that one of the interesting things with the demo is that it can actually help both parties because Evan's comments are helpful as well. I find it funny that you said that you're getting quite attached to Evan because we have a couple of generative AI avatars in virtual reality, and our main character, as it were, is called Hugh. And we started editing him into team pictures now. We've become very fond of him as well.
It is quite funny, isn't it? With Evan, it's like I think I got to the end of one conversation and I'd managed to persuade him to come in for one day for a team day. And I was going down the kind of, I've not seen you in ages. And kind of and I almost had this vision of him giving me a big bear hug. It's like, because he looks like that kind of man. So it's quite funny.
And if you give the same answers to Evan each time, will he respond in the same way each time, or is it entirely responsive, I guess is the word.
Yeah, no, it's entirely responsive. So one of the things I was thinking about earlier is obviously the way that we used to do this type of thing was we'd have branching scenarios, which were basically you're going down a pathway. They're pretty much a series of multiple choice questions. But no, I can say exactly the same things to Evan and he will respond differently. Even to the point where he'll complain that I'm not answering what he said, if that makes sense. So he'll kind of pick me up on the fact that I'm just saying random things. And I love it if you get their name wrong. Sometimes when you're testing, because you're testing different characters, you call them by the wrong name and they say, well, my name's so-and-so. And then you have to apologize to them and things. So yeah.
I love that. And are clients already using this, or is this in more of a beta format?
So this is about to go live. So we don't have, let me stop sharing so that I can see you a bit better. There we go. Yeah, so we don't have any customers using it fully at the moment. We've done lots of testing of it. So we've done lots of pilot testing and things, but we now actually have the product ready to go. We are officially launching it at an event on the 12th of October. But yeah, to all intents and purposes, it's out there. We're quite far down the process of talking to people. We'll probably come onto it later, but there's lots of not lots of challenges, but there is some differences in contracting because of the technology that we're using. So we're having to do quite a bit of work on that side as well because it's such new technology. There's lots of legal kind of implications and things like that as well. But it's out there and it's ready to be used by people. So we're quite excited to kind of get it into real people's hands and see what they make of it, really.
Absolutely, it's really exciting. Only 3 weeks to go till official launch.
Yes, yeah,
and what
not
has
long.
the initial feedback been from people who have tested it?
Yeah, so we worked with Mind Tools, as I said earlier, and actually they did a lot of the research on it. So they've got a brilliant researcher called Anna, who did kind of set up the pilot, and we took a cross section of Learning Pool and Mind Tools customers and put them through it. And we came back with some amazing feedback. Most of them loved it and were kind of blown away, just like this is like nothing I've tried before. We've even got some of the analysts, we're not allowed to quote them, but to say similar things, and certainly L&D people saying the same. But the pilot also gave us some great stats. So just by going through it once or twice, we found that it increased confidence of people in having those types of conversations by almost 10%, which is quite impressive. And that was actually with an earlier version as well, it was using an earlier version of the AI, which wasn't quite as how do we say it, quite as personable. So I think that will improve. We'll have to try and redo some of the testing. And 63% of them said that they'd learned something new about handling difficult conversations at work. So yeah, I think it's really good feedback at the moment. And yeah, it'd be nice to do some more in-depth research on that as well.
Mm. And how do you measure those metrics for return on investment for generative AI in general, or how have you measured that ROI so far?
That's a really good question. I think it's quite a hard thing to assess. Always assessing, kind of measuring return on investment is difficult. And that's because so many things, particularly with learning, feed in to how somebody improves, because what we're really looking for is that performance improvement. So I think confidence is a good one. If people are more confident to have those types of conversations, then being able to kind of assess that is quite good. I don't think you can really test it other than watching someone in terms of if you really want to see how people are doing. But I think it does have impacts in kind of other KPIs and stuff within businesses, things like retention of managers and staff, lots of organizations. So we're working with some that have kind of frontline staff, so working in sort of fast food restaurants and things like that. They have such a high turnover, and they think some of that is definitely down to managers not being prepared for those conversations that they need to have. So they're quite keen to use it in that kind of regard. And they'll be able to see, hopefully, if this is the only change they've made, I'm sure there will be others at the same time. Then they'll be able to get an idea of if their retention goes down, then, sorry, if their retention goes up, sorry, wrong way around, then that might show us that this is actually working. And so that even as an experienced manager, you can feel it working almost. It's like, I think I'm quite a good manager. I've managed people for a long time. They've always said nice things to me, so hopefully I am. But even so, I still find myself kind of going, oh yeah, I could have maybe phrased that better, or I could have considered doing that a bit differently. And it does really make you think. And I think employee engagement surveys, to get a kind of a litmus test almost of across the business, how are people finding, how are people feeling, how do people feel about their managers, are they able to have honest, frank conversations with them, are they willing to tackle the problems and challenges within the team, because that's really key to the culture of an organization. So yeah, not necessarily the easiest thing to measure, but I think there certainly are some measures out there that would make a difference.
Mm-hmm. And talking about how difficult conversations are, so you said that Evan was one of the more tricky characters that you have. So do the different characters you have different personalities, which I think I know the answer to that one, but are they also programmed to be relevant for different levels of people in the organization or different levels of experience? So is there someone who's more friendly and it's easier for people to practice with, and so on?
At the moment, so there's different ways that we can roll out AI conversations. So the one that I just showed you is one of our off-the-shelf library modules. So that one's relatively generic. We wanted it to work for as many organizations as possible and at as many levels as possible. But we can customize some of those, or we can customize the off-the-shelf ones, or we can create bespoke ones. So one of the customers that we're quite close to starting a bespoke project with has specifically asked that we have that different levels. So they want one for kind of frontline workers, and then they want one for the people that are managing the frontline workers. So they're quite specific about what those roles are and what they'll do. In terms of the personalities, they are very different, and we have kind of 3 characters for each scenario. We've tried to make them as varied as possible. In general, you'll get someone that's quite stubborn. You'll get someone that's maybe quite introverted. I mean, as you said, it depends on the scenario. So as I said, one of in fact, that particular one, we've got a guy called Cho who is just really doesn't want to come into the office because he's really quite anxious. So the scenario is exactly the same. He's resisting coming back into the office, but you need to try and unpick the reasons behind that. So the backstory of the characters is really important as well. So there's lots of nuance in the kind of the prompt writing and things like that. But yeah, you can do some really clever stuff and really get them performing how you want them to. That said, they can also go slightly rogue. We have got a lady called Janine. Our off-the-shelf ones are in kind of content sort of QA at the moment. And we've said that she likes to go off topic. And so what she does is at the end of everything she says something really random, like, my cat bit its tail by accident last night and jumped off the table. You're just like, okay, I think we need to look at the prompts for you. Or starts talking about kind of a film she saw last night in the middle of a work conversation. So yes, definitely nuanced, kind of
And is
to
she
get it
making
right.
them up, or have you pre-programmed her with a
No,
list of
she's making
random
them up.
things?
That's what's so funny. No, we haven't. We've just said she goes off topic.
Brilliant. I love that. That certainly makes it more fun. And
Yeah.
with the character who's more anxious to come back to work, it's also practicing that level of empathy with those conversations, perhaps more so than some of the other personalities. We have had a few questions come through. I'll just ask you one more question because it links well, and then we'll move on to some questions. So what challenges have you encountered while developing? So obviously that last character you mentioned goes off topic, but perhaps a little too off topic. Have you had any other challenges, whether that's in the development of the characters, or I was going to say the implementation, but I guess you haven't formally launched yet, but do you envision any challenges with implementation at the moment?
No, I think we've had less challenges than we would have expected. I mean, I think this is a kind of first, we're calling it an early adopters program at the moment, although when we go live, it will be a fully fledged product. So the AI that we're using is from OpenAI, but there are challenges in terms of costs, there are challenges in terms of rate limits and speed and things like that. So although we're going live using that, we're also doing lots of research. We've got a great data science team who are really good at this kind of stuff, and they are looking at different models. We're doing lots of testing around what else we could use, whether we can create our own and all those kind of things. So yeah, plenty to unpick there. But I think the main issues are, the main stumbling blocks are a bit like I mentioned earlier. Companies are quite nervous about this stuff. They're really keen to know kind of where the information is going, where it's being stored, and things like that, and whether it's being used. So one of the classic questions that we get asked is everything I put in being used to train the model, the AI model? The answer to that is no, because we have an agreement with them that we won't do that. There's obviously, we ask people not to put personal identifiable information in, but obviously we can't stop them. That said, none of it is stored against them or against their company. So there's things that we've put in place to try and counteract some of that. And also much of it is deleted after 30 days. So and we've got things that we've put on our side. So obviously, because we're using SCORM, we do know who the learners are, and we want to store the conversations and the scores so that they can get the data. But then some companies don't want that. They don't want that level of information sitting with us. So therefore, we're just hashing them out. And if we want to go back at some point, we can do that. But I think the things that people are really concerned about are things like whether it's kind of going to go completely off on a tangent, whether it's going to say something awful. I think there's been all these kind of news stories about AI kind of saying some really not very nice things. But actually the moderation that is in place is really quite good. We've had our testers trying to break it. We've had them trying to do all kinds of stuff and really trying to kind of get the worst out of it in a way. And they've not really managed to. They occasionally kind of manage to confuse it, but that seems to be about the worst thing. And I don't know if you noticed when I did the demo, but they had, we've got a kind of a flag this response. So if there are any issues, then they can flag it. And it might just be, we're expecting the majority of those to be, that was a bit odd, rather than it said something really awful. So
Yeah.
I think that's probably been the key issues that we've had. Trying to roll it out. I think in terms of implementation, because we've gone down the SCORM route, hopefully it will be fairly straightforward. straightforward for people to get up on their platforms, whatever they're using, really, because that's key. We want it to be easy for people to use. So
yeah, and scalable, definitely. We found that with our avatars as well, is that they tend to behave quite well. So we were speaking to a what's the word? A state jail, basically. And they were looking to use virtual speech. And as part of that, obviously, there's the generative AI stuff. And so our devs spent an afternoon basically trying to break the generative AI because they were worried that it would mean that people could talk to each other or they could plan something with the Gen AI. But actually it always tried to take people back onto the right track. So that was really interesting, like testing that we did there. I will go to some audience questions now. So first question from Chris: what tools are you using to get Evan's response? He's got a very particular personality. So I think you mentioned OpenAI. So are you using ChatGPT?
Yeah, we're using GPT-4. So we're using different bits of OpenAI actually for different things. So the speech to text is part of theirs as well. But yeah, no, we're just using the generic models, but we are kind of obviously overlaying them with sort of the learning design, the scenarios, the characters, and we go quite in depth on that, which gives them that kind of richness, I think, that you don't necessarily see if you just try and do something similar with ChatGPT.
Yeah. And people talk a lot about the power of prompting with AI as well. So it's not quite as simple as just to download ChatGPT and you could create the exact same thing.
No, I think that's an interesting one. And actually, the thing that you learn as you do more of this kind of working with these models is that in some ways, the more that you try and constrain them, they lose their power in a way. So there is a real art to kind of allowing them the freedom to kind of respond in a realistic way, but also to stop them going completely off the wall. So yeah, we've done quite a lot of testing around that and trying different things and things like that. So
And Samantha has asked, does this kind of training exist in French, including French culture and how French people would handle these conversations?
Yeah, really interesting question. So OpenAI will work. So our proof of concept that we did, which is kind of the version before the one that you've just seen, we didn't tell it what language to work in. And my French is poor, but enough to have a conversation just about with someone. What it does, if it's left to its own devices, is it will, if you speak to it in French, it will respond in French. So OpenAI's models do work in a number of languages very well. Currently, we are only focusing on English, US and UK English. The reason for that is the moderation only currently works in English. So we need to be a bit careful about how we kind of move past that. That said, we think we can do this in other languages. So for us, it will just be a question of when someone comes along. And it'll be really interesting to see actually whether it, along with the change in language, that it picks up the nuances of how you would deal with it. Obviously, you can feed it quite a lot of that. So the framework, for example, that I mentioned earlier, that tells you what good looks like. So you can certainly tell it how to do it. But because it's interesting, we've kind of almost done the flip of what lots of organizations have done, in terms of lots of them are using generative AI to create content, whereas we're using it for this role play and then to assess against a framework. So that gives us a bit more kind of control while still giving it the freedom to kind of do what it does, if that makes sense. So you could tell it kind of how you want it to behave and set the scenario so that it's relevant to the country that it's in. But as I said, I wouldn't be surprised if it also does quite a lot of that itself, because it's scraped from the internet. So if you've got articles, if it's scraping all of its kind of, I'm trying to think of an example, I don't know, change management articles that are in French, you would assume it would pick up the nuances of those rather than the ones that are written in English, if there's any particular difference.
Great, thank you. Helen has asked, do you think that branching scenarios have a future in learning design, or do you think AI will completely replace them? Oh, that's an interesting question.
That is a really interesting question, isn't it? I think honest answer is I don't know. I haven't got a crystal ball. My gut feel is that this type of interaction will replace them. I think the power of it is just so much greater in terms of a learning value, that this is the way it will go. I shouldn't have thought they're going to disappear anytime soon, because not everybody has access to this type of technology. There will be people that aren't keen to use it for quite a long time. But it may also be that you can do branching scenarios that are maybe more constrained, but that do use generative AI. So you might say something like, rather than having a multiple choice question, the user might be able to speak their response, but then the AI picks from some responses, if you know what I mean. So there might be a kind of hybrid way that comes along as well that might be really useful in certain situations. But yeah, I guess time will tell. I think generative AI is going to change how we see learning technologies. It's definitely the biggest technology that's come along since I've been working in this industry. So.
And if you think this time last year, like there's no way we would have had a webinar like this and been able to have this conversation.
No.
So the speed of it is amazing. Somebody else has asked, as well as difficult conversations for managers, what are the other use cases you see for corporate trainers to use these sorts of role plays?
Okay, so our off-the-shelf collection, that's the first one we're doing, covers a number of kind of aimed at new managers. So things like delegation, as said, resistance to change. We've got some performance ones, so managing poor performance. I'm trying to remember them all now. So that type of thing. Other areas that we're looking at are customer service. We think would be a really useful one, and that gets me off. I go off on a tangent at that point, because we've got a customer who has a large call center, and what they want to be able to do, and this is separate to AI conversations, but I can see how the same technology would do it really well. They currently have all the transcripts of every conversation that goes on within their call centers, and occasionally one of their trainers or one of their managers will go in and look at that, and then basically assess it against a framework and speak to them if they need to, say well done if they don't need to, and that kind of thing. But there's no reason that you couldn't take that transcript in the same way that we do with AI conversations, chuck it through the generative AI and say assess it, show that back to the learner kind of in real time, almost like you've just finished this call, this is how you did, and then do it that way as well. And obviously if there's any particular good or bad ones, you might want to put those back to the you might want then the trainer to get more involved and do things like that. But I think that could be a really interesting area to explore as well. I think if you go down that route, you do need the ability for people to flag it, to say, I disagree with your with the AI assessment. I want a human to look at this, especially because they use it to take people kind of off probation periods and things like that. So there's quite a lot of value attached to it. So you would definitely need to let someone kind of go, no, that's not fair. I don't agree.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think we should rely on AI just yet anyway for
I'm not sure if
our
I
sole
completely
ways of assessment.
Sorry,
No,
I'm not
I
sure if I
think
completely answered the question, did I? I got
yeah, you
sidetracked.
did. They were asking about use cases, so that's all good. I would actually just add a couple more use cases. So something that we do is a lot of what we do is around like public speaking training, and we've now added so that after you've finished a presentation, the audience can ask you questions, and it's generative AI that is asking you those questions, and then you respond to them and they can ask them back again. And then we also have role play for job interviews, so you can do mock interviews. So that's less on the corporate training side, but more but just interesting use case.
I was about to say interviews as well, but actually that public speaking one where you respond to questions is really interesting. I'd love to try that.
Great, you're more than welcome.
Does it take their speech effectively and then it creates some questions based on what they've said? Is that how it works?
Yeah. So the first version of it, you had to tell it what you were talking about. So you could just give it a topic. You didn't need to upload kind of a script or anything. You just told it a topic. But then the latest iteration, which is only just been released, is that you will just speak about your topic and it will pick up what you're speaking about, and then it will ask you questions based off your topic. So it can then be personalized for anyone who uses the app.
Ah, no, that sounds really cool. And it is, again, it's that practice, isn't it? It's a bit like virtual speech. Your whole initial concept was putting people on a stage in a safe environment. And I think all of this stuff we're talking about does that basically, doesn't it? It gives people that opportunity to practice and to really kind of hone their skills. So particularly with all the talk of skills and stuff in kind of learning generally, I think it's really good timing. It seems to kind of just all fit really nicely.
Yeah. And as you mentioned earlier about tracking confidence, all of these role plays don't just help with the skills, they help with the confidence as well, because there's no point feeling like you're skilled at something if you haven't got the confidence to actually go out there and do it. So that's something else I love about AI role plays. We've got one more question from Julia. Can you give some examples of the stats you were going to provide your client with? I'm not sure I quite understand. Do you understand that, Lindsay? Maybe have I read that?
I'm not sure.
Maybe
I did give some stats earlier, which was to do with increasing the confidence by about 10%. 63% of the cohort said they learned something new about handling difficult conversations at work. I've also got lots of stats, but not right in front of me, about kind of how, I think it was a CMI report. Oh, did I write them down? Hold on, bear with me. Oh yeah, here we go. So Chartered Management Institute, I don't know whether this is what you're referring to, but they did a survey of how people feel about difficult conversations. So 66% of managers feel stressed or anxious if they know a difficult conversation is coming up. 57% said they do almost anything to avoid a difficult conversation, which is quite scary as a manager, kind of thinking if people aren't having those conversations, then people's performance can't improve. And 52% said they'd rather put up with a negative situation at work than have to talk about it. So there's definitely a need, I think, we can take from that.
Yeah, and I think we can all relate to those stats one way or another as well. I have also just messaged Julia. Julia, if you'd like to expand on your question at all to make sure that we've fully answered it, then please go for it. We have had a message from Izaskan saying, I tried VirtualSpeech's job interview role play in Spanish and it worked very well. I felt like the generative AI represented the Spanish culture in terms of interview questions and style quite well. So that's interesting to know, referring back to the culture. It probably is, because if it's being fed everything in Spanish and from Spanish articles, then it will be reflective of that. So that is interesting.
It's so clever, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so clever. So yeah, if anybody else has any questions, feel free to add them. Otherwise, I'll hog the questions and I'll ask Lindsay some more. So obviously, whenever we talk about using AI at scale, whether that's for individuals or in the workplace, there are ethical considerations as well. What sort of guidelines or considerations do you think organizations should keep in mind when using generative AI for learning?
I think it goes back to some of the things I talked about earlier. You obviously need to consider where you're putting information. So you don't want to be putting client information into AI, for example, ChatGPT or any of them really, and asking it to summarize it and things like that, because you're giving that information or you're putting that information somewhere that you shouldn't. So I think there's lots around kind of policy, making sure that if you do want to use it, that you're using trusted suppliers, or that you're using suppliers that you have enterprise setups with. So one of the things I often say is just go and play with a lot of this stuff, but you want to play with it on your own. Not so much on your own time, you probably do want to do it on your own time, but on your own content. So pick a subject or pick something off the web and try it on that, rather than using work stuff initially. Make sure that you've spoken to your kind of security team before you start using some of this stuff. we're going through a lot of that at the moment, just really making sure that we're okay to use it and that we're confident, and also that it's in the contracts of our customers and things like that, and our people actually. So wherever you want to use it, you just need to consider those kind of things. In terms of ethics and stuff, I think the ways that we're using it for learning, I think we're probably okay. I mean, obviously, in terms of, we've talked a bit about the kind of the localization in terms of languages in different countries. So I mean, there might be bias built into the system, although nothing too much seems to come out. I think they have got quite good guardrails in place around some of that now, but it's just being aware of those things, I think. So I mean, there was always the classic one that I remember of I think Amazon used AI to sift through CVs, and they were finding that it wasn't putting any women forward for software development jobs, because the majority of people that were doing those roles had done specific hobbies and things like that, and maybe the women hadn't. And so when they looked into it and started to unpick it, there wasn't an intention to have bias in there, but it's very, very easy to introduce it. Less so with the large language models, because they do scour the whole web, but still certainly something that's worth considering.
Is that something that you could program into the prompts, is around looking out for like biases? So if you were to tell it some of the like more unconscious bias that people might have, is that one way that you could try to eliminate it maybe?
It's interesting, actually. We're starting to look at some, so we've been asked about compliance and ethics scenarios, and we're starting with ethics because they're slightly less legal things depending on your location. But I think, and that looks at some of that. So you'd probably build it into the frameworks, and really you need to, it makes it quite difficult to write them in some ways. So I think we've got one scenario that we're testing, which is related to discrimination. And obviously, as soon as you start to talk about discrimination, you can get into discrimination and things like that. So we've gone for age because we felt that was a relatively safe, everybody's going to get older. So you kind of hope that that's a bit easier to deal with. But yeah, we will be doing lots of testing around it. But you can certainly kind of put as one of your framework items, kind of, please check whether there was any unconscious bias in the responses. And that would certainly pick it up, I'm sure, because it's amazing how nuanced the feedback is, and it really can check on that as well. And I guess also because we're doing role play, the user can call that out if it sees that what a response is coming back. Then they could call it out. Although I guess actually the AI doesn't know much about the manager other than their name and that they're their manager. So it might be tricky for them to be too biased towards them.
Interesting. Okay, thank you. We've had another question come in. Sorry if I missed it at the time. The scoring you had earlier for your conversation with Evan, how did that work? How do you get a score from that interaction? Does the AI have ideal examples?
Yes, it has exactly that. We give it a what good looks like. So we will say to it, this is what we want you to assess this conversation against, this particular goal. And then for each of those goals, we say a 10, for it to get a 10, it would need to do this, this, and this, and not do this. For a 7, it would need to do this, this, and this. And then we work all the way down, basically. It's not an exact science. If you run the same conversation through, you will get slight variations, but not huge. Things like kind of 7s to 8s, 8s to 9. So kind of you're generally within a point of where you are. So we wouldn't want people to kind of, I mean, it's soft skills anyway. It's a very hard thing to really judge someone against. It's more a kind of, we did consider doing like a traffic light system. You might have noticed that they were coloured. So amber is kind of if you're middling, if you're below, I think it's 3 or 4, it's in red, and it's green if you're above sort of 7 or 8. So it's more of a guide rather than a kind of a hard, as I said, I wouldn't want anyone to be kind of not coming off their probation period because we gave them a low score. So
yeah, definitely. So just a final couple of questions before we close up. So what advice would you give to anybody who's listening, whether it's now or when it's on YouTube? What advice would you give to people who are looking to adopt generative AI for learning in their organizations? Where should they begin, for example?
Yeah, really interesting. So I think there's a couple of places. I tend to think there's two key areas where generative AI helps, and that's efficiency and effectiveness. So I think as learning and development professionals, we can be more efficient through the use of generative AI. And you can do that by using the tools that are freely available. So we've talked a bit about ChatGPT. ChatGPT can give you a structure for an e-learning module. It can write you a scenario if you give it kind of a small amount of information. It can repurpose a scenario. So say you've got one that's set in a call center, but you want it for your engineering team, it can rewrite it for you within seconds. Can also write you questions, write you activities and all that kind of thing. So lots of the text-based stuff it can help with. It can help speed up that process. But then there's also generative AI that can create images, videos. I don't know whether you've come across too many of those, but there's lots out there. So graphics wise, you're looking at things like DALL-E 2, Midjourney is my particular favorite. It makes everything look beautiful, which might not be to everyone's taste, but it is very nice. And again, there's lots out there. I'm just trying to think which is the video one that works really well and does all the languages. It's gone out of my head now. But anyway, I'll find it. We can maybe stick it in the notes somewhere or something. And then again, there's plenty that do kind of will create audio for you, create videos, kind of sort of talking head videos, or create different types of videos. So all that kind of efficiency stuff I think is really good. Multi-lang as well. We're doing lots with machine translation. I think there's always the caveats of you probably need a human to cast an eye over it afterwards, but it does work pretty well. And then on the other side, you've got kind of the effectiveness bit, which is where we get into things like AI conversations. I think that's slightly harder to do yourself if you want to do it in an organizational context. But it's the type of things that I'd be looking at sort of the learning technology vendors doing. So the likes of you and us. Personalization of content, I think, is going to be a really big one. It's more complicated than what we've just shown you because it needs a lot more information about the person. It needs memory beyond the individual session. But I think that will be where it can be tied into kind of learning platforms, into skills platforms. If it can remember what you wanted to focus on, if you did a particular task that it set you, how well it went, whether you liked it, whether you felt you learned something from it, and then from that creating or suggesting different content and things like that. But obviously that's something that really needs kind of the big tech vendors to do. So yeah, I think there's lots of scope to do all that kind of stuff. It would just be interesting to see kind of what comes out and what direction everyone heads in, really.
Definitely. And you mentioned early on about that at Learning Pool Labs, you look at technologies of the future and learning technologies of the future. So, and this might be quite a hard question, so I do apologize in advance, but I'm genuinely curious to know where you think that either AI or learning technology in general will be in 10 years' time.
Oh, that's really an interesting question. I think it will, I think a lot of the barriers will go away, is what I'd like to hope anyway. So at the moment, we're still very much in this kind of, you go to your learning platform, which is separate to everything else that you have. You get assigned an e-learning module, or you get told that you've got to go on this course. I think something that really does kind of follow the learner through their journey, whether that's literally as a person or whether it's their journey within an organization. So I kind of think of it a bit like a personal tutor, and this is something that generative AI can do quite well. So it's a bit of a tutor, it's a bit of a coach. It's asking you where you want to get to. So we've got a skills platform that basically can match the skills that you've got to roles within your organization. It gives you a percentage match, and it might say you haven't got this particular skill. So it could then take you on a journey to achieving that skill through doing different projects, tasks, maybe some e-learning, reading articles, getting you to sign up to the Harvard Business Review, whatever it may be. But checking in with you saying, well, you said you were going to work on this school. How's it going? Did you do that thing that you said you were going to do? But you've got to do it in a non-annoying way. That's the challenge.
Yeah. An accountability coach.
Yes, I'm sure most of us could do with one of those.
Yeah. And finally, so if you could leave people listening today with one message, what would it be?
I think it would be go and play. There's some really amazing stuff out there. I can maybe try and put a slide together if you want with some of the kind of, I say freely available. Most of them do free trials, but everything from kind of Chat GPT to some of the video ones. I was playing with one the other day that basically will create you a whole e-learning course off a web link, and there's just loads of stuff out there. So I think just, yeah, go and have a play, have a bit of fun, and then you'll know when the right time is, or the right technology or the right application to bring into your work environment and your kind of learning and development sphere, basically. So
Absolutely. And everything's evolving so quickly, and there'll be more and more platforms coming out. So yeah, just try them all, have fun first, and then see how these things evolve. Well, thank you so much, Lindsey, for joining us today, and to everyone who tuned in as well. Unfortunately, we are out of time. If people want to contact you or learn more about what you're doing at Learning Pool, where can they reach you? How can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn, or they can email me. I am lindsey@learningpool.com. I've been there that long that I just have one name. Or labs@learningpool.com is me as well, so even shorter.
Okay, great. We'll put that in the description when we upload the recording. So yeah, if anybody listening would like to learn more about Gen AI for e-learning, I'm about to pop a link into the chat to some resources that we've created at VirtualSpeech, and one of them is an ebook on the topic. So I will pop that in. Our next webinar topic is about using XR for enterprise training, and that is mid next month. And I'll be joined by Lena Srebrova from Digital North. So hope to see you all then. And thank you so much again, Lindsey.
No problem. Really lovely to join you and have a nice chat. It's been great. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Lindsey. Bye.
Take care. Bye.